it's so nice to be here with the Sisters of Sion and also with Sheikh Shomali. Now, I'm sure, Sheikh Shomali, you weren't expecting me to be here. However, here I am through Zoom. It's rather wonderful to be able to join you all in London. And introducing Sheikh Shomali, of course, he has a very large CV, you know, it's very impressive. But the way I think about him is that he is a scholar. He is a scholar who has studied in Qom, in Tehran, and in Manchester. He founded the International Institute for Islamic Studies in Qom. He's a teacher. He has led numerous educational courses in Islam and all over the world, over 30 cities across 4 continents. He's a writer. He has again a very impressive list of...
I'm sorry, Isabel, you need to unmute yourself. My mistake, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
That's okay, that's okay. Okay, I'll start all over again. Sheikh Shomali, I don't know where you are. But I've kind of divided your CV into, well, 4 or 5 sections. First of all, you're a scholar. You're a scholar who has studied in Qom and Tehran and Manchester. You're the founding director of the International Institute for Islamic Studies in Qom. You're a teacher. You've taught all over the world in 30 cities across 4 continents. You're a writer. You have an impressive list of publications, many of them about Islam and Shia Islam, and one in particular that I know myself is one on the unity of God and unity in God, which is very close to your heart. You are, I'm going to call you an interfaith practitioner because you have been engaged in interfaith dialogue at all levels, really. And you have engaged in interfaith dialogue all over the world, including Scotland. And that's how, in fact, I know you. But the last thing I would say about you, and for me it's maybe the most important, I think you are a friend. You are a good friend.
Thank you.
You're a good friend to Focolari. You have a strong and a long relationship with them. You are a good friend to us in Scotland because working with Al Bayt Scotland, you have engaged in dialogue and become a friend of the Scottish Bishops' Committee for Interreligious Dialogue. And I know that as a result of today, you will become a friend of the Sisters of Zion. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome you and to introduce you, and looking forward very much to what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Sister. Thank you. Shall I start?
Yes.
Okay. In the name of God, the compassionate, the merciful, I am very delighted to be with you, and I thank God as this actually is happening on the same day that we celebrate the birth of our second Imam and the grandson of the Prophet, Imam Hassan, who was very well known for his generosity. So I am very thankful to God for being able to meet you in such a day in the holy months of Ramadan, and also for you in this period of time between Easter and Pentecost. The topic is remembrance of God and in God, an Islamic perspective. I cannot exaggerate with respect to significance of this topic. This is a topic that is very dear to my heart, and the reason is because the more I studied Quran and Hadith and reflect and think, the more I understand how important is this topic of remembrance of God. Just to begin with, I can tell you one hadith from the Prophet, and then by comparison with one verse of the Quran, we can realize that how fundamental is remembrance of God. In the Quran, we have very well-known verse of light. Ayatun Nur is the verse of light in the chapter light. Normally, verses don't have name. Chapters have names. But there are some verses that are so important and so much quoted that they are given names. One of these verses that has a name is this verse, Ayatun Nur. And it is in the chapter which is called An-Nur, light. So, in this verse, which is very important verse, the Quran says, Allahun nuru samawati wal ardh. God is the light of the skies and the earth. And this continues. In a hadith from the Prophet, he says, remembrance of God is light of the skies and the earth. So, it shows that dhikr is the way to reflect the light of God to yourself and others. Dhikr or remembrance of God means to receive light of God, to open yourself to the light of God, and then this light would change you, and this light also would come out, would be reflected to anything, anyone who would be at your reach. So we are dealing with very fundamental topic, remembrance of God. As I already mentioned, the term that we mainly use for remembrance of God is dhikr. D-H-I-K-R, dhikr. Dhikr sometimes means to mention, sometimes means to remember. And here, maybe the nearest thing in English is remembrance. But it's not just remembrance, because sometimes you remember someone that you like or you love, or sometimes you remember someone that you have no emotional connection with. Sometimes you remember even an enemy. So remembrance is very general. What we mean here by remembrance in this context is remembrance with openness, with awe, with love. It's a positive way of remembrance. So we remember God by opening ourselves to God. There is a verse in the Quran that I very much use in my discussions about significance of dhikr, and actually I argue from this verse that the remembrance of God is also involving faith, because I believe that faith is also a kind of remembrance of God. Righteous deeds are also instances of remembrance of God. So remembrance of God is not just a mental condition or a spiritual situation. Anything positive that we can bring, anything positive that we can do to ourselves or others, is falling under remembrance of God. So this verse says, أَفَمَنْ شَرَحَ اللَّهُ صَدْرَهُ لِلْإِسْلَامِ فَهُوَ عَلَى نُورٍ مِّن رَبِّهِ فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُم مِّن ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. God makes a comparison, but sometimes in the Quran, both parts parties of the comparison are not mentioned so that we think. So God says, is the one whose chest has been broadened and opened up for submission to the truth, and therefore he has light from his Lord. Is he equal to? Then he doesn't mention the other part. You understand? By comparison, it means, is such person whose chest is opened, is broadened, has capacity for receiving light of his Lord, equal to someone whose heart is closed, is not able to receive light from his Lord? Are they the same? Then God says, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْقَاسِيَةِ قُلُوبُهُم مِّن ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. Woe to the people whose hearts are hard. They are so hard-hearted that they cannot do dhikr. They cannot remember God. So it shows that remembrance of God means the heart is open, is able to receive and reflect the light of God to your life, to lives of others, to anything that come to your reach. So it involves faith, it involves righteousness, everything. I would like to share with you some key points about remembrance of God from an Islamic perspective, but we would have good time also for discussion. I am very happy and very pleased to receive your questions, your comments, your suggestions, similarities that you may notice, or differences that you may notice. So, what is definition of remembrance of God? As we said, in my humble opinion, we can say it means a kind of remembrance which comes with respect, which comes with humility before God, with understanding his greatness, a kind of remembrance which is with joy, a kind of remembrance that is directing you towards your higher levels of perfection. It's not just a remembrance. There are things that we remember, but we tend to think that it's better not to remember, or we are sure that we should not remember. Sometimes we think that someone has wronged us. We don't need to keep remembering this. So it's not any remembrance is dhikr. Dhikr is positive remembrance, where there is potential for growth for us. Muslim scholars, based on the Islamic resources, literature, they divide remembrance of God into three types. Sometimes it is in heart. By your heart you remember God. Maybe you are sitting somewhere or standing or in any condition, because the Quran says there are people who remember God whether they are sitting or standing or lying down. الَّذِينَ يَذْكُرُونَ اللَّهَ قِيَامًا وَقُعُودًا وَعَلَى جُنُوبِهِمْ. So when I say sitting, I don't mean it has to be sitting, but I'm just giving as an example. You're sitting on your prayer mat or somewhere in a place of worship, and you are reflecting, you are contemplating about God, about names of God, attributes of God, acts of God, your relation with God. All are instances of remembrance by heart. We call this al-dhikrul qalbi. Qalb means heart. The second type is to remember God through your actions. Remembrance through practice. In the Quran, many acts and practices are introduced, but maybe we can say two major practices that the Quran again and again brings them and mentions them as requirements of faith, as instances of dhikr, is prayer and giving alms, charity. Prayer is a very important way of remembering God. The Quran, when it talks about our ritual prayer, says, إِنَّ الصَّلَاةَ تَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَلَذِكْرُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ. The Quran says, if you do your prayer properly, it would stop doing bad things. It would stop doing immoral things. If a person says his or her prayer, but still annoys other people, does mischief, commits sins, does immoral things, for example, cheating like this person is just bringing the form of the prayer and not the reality of prayer, because prayer has to stop the person who prays from doing immoral things. And then after that, the Quran says, وَلَذِكْرُ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ. But remembrance of God is greater than this, because you don't want just not to do bad things. You don't want to say prayer in order to avoid sinning. This is too little. We want to say our prayer in order to rise. And this is why in Islamic spirituality we have this famous saying that as-salatu mi'rajul mu'min. Prayer is ascension for mu'min. A believer through prayer can rise the ladders of perfection, can rise the degrees of nearness to God. So prayer, also charity, these are two important cases of remembrance of God. The Quran says there are people that nothing makes them forget God. It's possible. And I am sure in your tradition also, you have seen people, and I hope you are yourself of also those kind of people, that they are always mindful of God. Whether they are praying, or maybe they are working, maybe they are walking, maybe they are driving, cooking, teaching, taking care of patients in hospital, but they are always mindful of God. So the Quran says there are such people. رِجَالٌ لَا تُلْهِيهِمْ تِجَارَةٌ وَلَا بَيْعٌ عَنْ ذِكْرِ اللَّهِ. There are people that nothing, even when they are selling or buying, nothing can make them forget God. And then it says, وَإِقَامِ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِيتَاءِ الزَّكَاةِ. As two instances of remembrance, Quran mentions prayer and giving alms. So with prayer, we connect to God directly. But of course, it's very much recommended to be congregational. For the obligatory prayers, we should try to do it in a congregation. And this is very good because it helps us connect with each other and to God. With giving alms, we help people, we reach out to people who are in need, but again, by reaching out to them, we are connecting to God. So both of them are remembrance of God. Even if you are doing something for the community, for the society, still it's an act of remembrance of God. So this is the second type of remembrance. The first was remembrance by heart. The second is remembrance through practices. And the third is verbal remembrance. We call it al-dhikrul lafzi, to invocate names of God. You know that we Muslims use rosary, like, rosary that, you are using also. But normally our rosary has 3 sections of 33 seats. And in between there is 1 to separate them. So it has 101 seats normally. And we use it in order to help us to invocate names of God with certain number. For example, something which is very popular is glorification, which is named after the daughter of the Prophet, because the Prophet gifted her with this tasbih of Lady Fatima. So after each prayer, but also independently, throughout the day and night, we can invocate God by saying 34 times Allahu Akbar. God is greater than any description. 33 times Alhamdulillah. This is like Alleluia. All the praise is due to God. And 33 times Subhanallah. May God be glorified. So this is lafzi. This is something that we utter. We utter names of God. And after prayer, our ritual prayer finishes, we do this before we engage with any other thing or another action. So this verbal invocation is a very explicit form of remembrance, but it has to be with the first and second. So if I don't remember God in my heart, and if my actions don't show remembrance of God, and just I keep repeating his names, this is not working. So remembrance has to start from the heart, be seen in our actions, and explicit then in our words. So this should come together. Sometimes maybe it becomes like a routine. We just keep using rosary and mentioning these names, but our mind can be somewhere else. This may not work. It's not useless, but it doesn't work that much. It has to be with remembrance in the heart. In the Shia community, it's very popular that in the night of Jummah, the night of Friday, we recite a prayer, not a ritual prayer. It's kind of supplication. We call it Du'a Kumail. This is the prayer that our first Imam taught to someone called Kumail. So this dua, this supplication is very dear, because every week people try to read this, and there's lots of beautiful ideas about God and our relation with God. One of the things that we say in that supplication is Ya man ismuhu dawa'un wa dhikruhu shifa'un. O the one whose name is medicine, and whose remembrance is healing. So name of God is medicine. Remembrance of God is healing, is cure. So upon reflection, I have always thought about this sentence in this way, that names of God are those things that can cure all our problems. But like a medicine, just having the medicine available is not enough. Just repeating the names of the medicine is not enough. If you have a prescription and you keep this prescription in your hand, and even look at it and read it again and again, even if you go to the pharmacy and buy the medicine and bring it home, as long as you have not taken medicine, it's not going to help with your healing. So, names of God are like medicine for us, but we have to take. So when I say, for example, God is merciful, if I just say God is merciful, or oh merciful, if I just say it has some benefit, but not that much, unless it is meant, unless it comes from my heart and mind, unless I am engaged with it, unless I try to absorb it. So if I keep thinking of my Lord as merciful, then I should be myself moving towards that direction, that I also should become merciful. But if I just say, oh merciful, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahman, for example, 1,000 times, but I am not thinking about it, I am not reflecting on it, it has not been taken as a direction for my own behavior, then it means that I am not taking this medicine. I am just keeping this medicine, not taking it. So verbal remembrance is very important, but it has to be originating from remembrance in the heart and be accompanied by remembrance through your actions, by your organs. So this is about types of remembrance. Then what are the outcomes of remembrance and what are the negative outcomes of forgetting God? If we remember God, everything is going to the right direction. It's like a radio set which is tuned well to the station. If radio is tuned well to the station, you have clear sound. You can understand very clearly. If radio is switched off, you don't hear anything. If radio is taken, is tuned to a wrong station, you get other messages, other signals. Or if it is the same station, but it's not well tuned, you don't have clarity. Sometimes you may misunderstand what is being said. We have to tune ourselves to God. If we are just closing ourselves and we think that we can independently understand, instead it's like a radio which is switched off. And if we mistakenly connect ourselves to other sources and we think we are connected to God, but we are connected to some people's opinions, even maybe some, religious leaders or scholars who are not themselves tuned to God, then we may get wrong signals. And if we manage to get really connected to the true source, but not well adapting to it, we get unclear messages, nothing that can bring us light, guidance, wisdom, hope. So we need to tune ourselves well to God. And this is remembrance of God. So remembrance brings order to us, brings clarity, puts everything in the right order. If there is any erosion in our heart, is removed. Our first Imam Ali, who is the fourth caliph for all Muslims and the first Imam for the Shia Muslims, but also he is a spiritual master for almost all, apart from very few, almost all Sunni and Shia Sufi orders, they trace back their genealogy of their orders to him. So he's very, very known for his spirituality after the Prophet. So he has very beautiful sayings about remembrance of God. And I would like to mention to Sermon 222 of Nahjul Balagha. It's a collection of his words and writings and sermons. So he says, I just mentioned part of it in Arabic because some people may want to find it the whole text. So I say just part in Arabic to make it search for them easier. إن الله سبحانه وتعالى جعل الذكرى جلاء للقلوب. God the Almighty has made remembrance a kind of polishing for hearts. When we remember God, the traces of darkness, the burden of forgetfulness of God can be removed. Erosion can be removed from our heart. Our heart becomes again a kind of like new, fresh, vibrant heart. Then he says, with remembrance of God, our eyes can now start hearing again. Not in a physical way. Maybe you can physically hear everything, but you cannot get the message. You cannot get what you need from what you hear. You cannot understand the truth. So with remembrance of God, your ears also will be tuned well. Your eyes can see well. And there would be a very soft and you can say a soft and welcoming condition in your heart and in all your channels of understanding. And then he says, God the Almighty in all ages, in all times, has some people that he would whisper to them. Normally we use whispered prayer for our conversation with God in private. We say munajat, so to whisper to God. But here he says there are servants of God. In every age you find some people, maybe many or maybe not many. Perhaps in our time not many, we don't know. But there are people like this, that God whispers to them. But how? By listening to a voice of coming? No, not necessarily. Najahum fi fikrihim. God whispers to them through their reflection, through their thinking. So when they are contemplating and try to understand, God whispers to them. God takes direction and leads their thinking and contemplation into what he wants, so that would bear fruits. وَكَلَّمَهُمْ فِي ذَاتِ عُقُولِهِمْ. God speaks to them, but in their intellects. In their intellects he speaks to them. And then he says, as a result, they have light of awakeness in their ears, in their eyes, in their hearts, and then they remind other people. We need in our community, in our society, people who remember God very well, non-stop, and they can remind us of God. So this is about one of the outcomes of remembrance of God, that can polish our heart, can bring clarity to our understanding, can bring focus, can bring direction. And the Quran says that one of the outcomes of remembrance of God is tranquility, serenity. Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. With remembrance of God, hearts come at rest. One of the problems that we have in the world today, and I think this is increasing problem, is that we most of the time go through lots of stress, lots of psychological pressure. There are lots of mental illnesses. So maybe people have managed sometimes to meet their physical, material needs. Maybe sometimes they have even money, but still they are not satisfied. There's so much of pressure on our generation, our youths, our elderly people, middle-aged people. There is no exception. They all feel that they need support. They need to belong. They need to be sure that there is someone who cares for them really, not just smiles and ignores them. So remembrance of God is the thing that can bring serenity, tranquility, inner peace. And if we don't remember God, then our life would be very much, according to the Quran, pressed. You would have lots of pressure. It's like someone who is climbing mountains, and then the level of oxygen is very little. So you feel your chest is under pressure. You feel breathing is very difficult now. So without God, we cannot breathe properly. So we need to remember God to bring serenity. And when you are tranquil, your decisions are more reliable. If someone is full of stress, if someone is depressed, if someone has anxiety, then they may make decisions that would make it even harder for them and for others. With tranquility, you can make better decisions. You can choose better your friends. So this is one of the outcomes of prayer. And something also I say about forgetting God, although I already touched about it, but I want to say something that the Quran introduces to us, and that is forgetting yourself. Maybe for people who are very spiritual or are familiar with the spiritual traditions, this is a known topic, or people who study psychology. But some people maybe don't understand what does it mean to forget yourself. I know myself, I know my name, I know my date of birth, I'm not forgetting myself. But this is a deep spiritual concept. The Quran says that people can forget themselves. It's not that we forget others only, we can forget ourselves. And the connection between remembrance of God and remembrance of yourself is in this way, that if you remember God, you remember yourself well. If you forget God, you forget yourself. The Quran says, لا تكونوا كالذين نسوا الله فأنساهم أنفسهم. Do not be those people that they forgot God and then as a result they forgot themselves. With forgetfulness about God, we are missing very important part of our own self awareness, our own understanding of ourselves. And if you forget yourself, then you don't know why you are here in this world. You don't know what you want to achieve. And when you are close to departure, then you look back and see what I have achieved. You sometimes see there is nothing that you can say, okay, this is the legacy of my life. And for sure, legacy of a human being cannot be just money, or I have lots of assets, or even I have lots of books or etc. These are not that valuable that can be legacy of a human being. A human being's legacy must be kindness, benevolence, charity work, anything that you do in a spirit of remembrance of God to make this world more pleasing to God, a better place for His children, and moving this world humbly but with persistence towards establishment of kingdom of God on the earth, so that every children of Adam can live with dignity and with justice and peace and solidarity. So this should be our legacy, and this cannot happen if we forget ourselves. And we cannot avoid forgetting ourselves and our aims and our potentials if we forget God. The Quran talks about quantity and quality of remembrance of God also. In our hadith, in our Islamic narrations, for example, we have this hadith from our sixth Imam, Imam Sadiq, that everything has a limit. For everything, there is a dosage. Some quantity is mentioned. For example, when it comes to our daily ritual prayer, so we have 5 prayer, and each of them has a certain number of units, altogether 17 units in 5 offices of prayer. When it comes to fasting, for example, we fast in the months of Ramadan. When it comes to Hajj, if you are healthy and wealthy and there is possibility, once upon your life you should go to Mecca, you must go to Mecca and perform your pilgrimage to Mecca. So there are numbers, there are limits, there are quantities attached to these practices. But the sixth Imam says, when it comes to remembrance of God, there is no limit. You remember God as much as you can. It's always good to remember Him. And the Quran also has actually said this, so our Imam is inspired by the Quran. The Quran says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu dhkurullaha dhikran kathira. O those who believe, remember God in abundance, which means as much as you can. And when it comes to quality, because it's not just a matter of, prolonging your remembrance of God, you should also make it as deep as possible. In one place, when God talks to the people who perform pilgrimage to Mecca, He says about Mash'ar, one of the places that they have to go is Mash'arul Haram, says that فَإِذَا قَضَيْتُم مَنَاسِكَكُمْ فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَذِكْرِكُمْ آبَاءَكُمْ أَوْ أَشَدَّ ذِكْرًا. You should remember God as you remember your fathers. You remember your father with a very detailed image, with love, with respect, with appreciation. But what about God? We don't want to remember God just as a philosophical or theological idea. We want to have personal, intimate acquaintance with God. The way you remember your father, your mother. Oh, ashad dhikra, or even stronger. So we have quantity of remembrance and quality of remembrance. But as I said in the beginning, you can only be sure that you are really remembering God if two things happen. One is that you see your life is improving. You see you are more focused, more tranquil, more soft. And also people also should be able to see in you light of God. There is no way that I am connected and tuned to God and God's message and God's will, and then people don't feel I have become a better person, a more benevolent person, a more caring person. Whenever someone moves towards God, he would be more concerned about people. This is one of the key points in Islamic spirituality, that if you move towards God, it should be seen in the way you care for people. You cannot just say, I want to, just detach myself from anything, any social, any, community affairs. I just want to focus on my relation with God. No. Your relation with people is part of your relation with God. Because God is God of everyone, and He wants you to help His creation, His creatures, His people. And at the end, I end with this hadith from the Prophet, so that we can have more time for reflections and questions, etc. The Prophet said, be informed that best of your actions in the sight of your Lord, the purest of them, the highest of them in degree, the best thing that sun has been shining on is remembrance of God. And God has said that Anna jalisu man dhakarani. We have a beautiful hadith that Moses once asked God. This is not in the Quran, this is in Islamic narrations. That Moses asked God, my Lord, should I whisper to you? Are you near so that I whisper to you? Or you are far so that I call you? Those who know Arabic, this is very beautifully said in Arabic. أَقَرِيبٌ أَنْتَ فَأُنَاجِيكَ أَمْ بَعِيدٌ أَنْتَ فَأُنَادِيكَ. So shall I whisper or shall I call? And God said, أَنَا جَلِيسُ مَنْ ذَكَرَنِي. God said, I am sitting next to the one who remembers me. Even you don't need to whisper, of course. It's good to whisper, it's good to call God. But as long as a person is remembering God, he must know that God is next to him. God is very close to him. So I pray to God that God would help us to remember him. And my also a special prayer in this time is that I pray to God to help us remember him together, because I believe that there is a way of remembrance of God, which is when people who believe in God, despite differences in their traditions, they see so much prominence to God that they try to remember God together. They try to help each other. If I as a Muslim have a problem in remembering God, my fellow believers in God from other traditions can help me, and vice versa. We should help each other in remembering God. And I'm sure if we remember God together, there is much greater blessings coming to us, because it shows that our love for God has made us able to overcome all our differences, which compared to God are not big. Anything compared to God is not big. So if we can focus on God as the central point for our remembrance, for our life, for our services, then I think we can together work, and we can remember him together, and we can ask him to guide us towards what he expects from us as a united group of believers in God for serving his cause and for serving his people. Thank you very much, and I am very happy to receive your comments and questions. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin.
Well, a very big thank you, Sheikh Shomali.
You're welcome.
That was wonderful insights there. And I wonder if we can give ourselves 10 minutes to reflect and think about what you said, and maybe we'll come back in about 10 minutes. And if anyone has any questions or comments or things to say, we can say them then, or maybe write them in the chat. So maybe we'll come back in 10 minutes from now, which will be 3 o'clock UK time. I know it's different times.
Sure.
The Zoom alive.
So they can just mute and switch off their camera and come back,
yes,
yeah?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Thank you.